Kotter, the Agileberg is melting. Now, we mentioned John Kotter in the first video of these series. I'd like to go back to some of the other aspects of his 8-step approach to organizational change. Now, I wouldn't recommend using these steps as a cookbook or a recipe to slavishly follow. After all, Kotter himself has been updating them over the years and has moved from a pretty sequential model with a finite ending to a more agile model involving change agent armies and parallel work. But whilst I wouldn't use them as that cookbook, I do feel having an awareness of them will help us understand some of the concerns that will occur in our transformation. We've already mentioned the essential one of building a guiding coalition. I'd now like to look to his actual first step, which is where the title of his book, The Iceberg is Melting, is derived from. Fundamentally, the idea is create a sense of urgency. Expose to the organisation a compelling reason why we should change from our status quo. Now, the status quo is a very comfortable position to be in. As a species, we seem to be rather change averse. There's this great book out there called Immunity from Change by Lisa Leahy and Robert Keegan. Quotes a recent study in their book showing that when doctors tell heart patients they will die if they don't change their habits, only 1 in 7 will be able to follow through with that successfully. 6 out of the 7, when given the option change or die, choose death. So our compelling reason needs to be more than just mere logic. It must also capture the hearts and minds of our colleagues. Now, let's look at the third step, which is create a vision for change. You know, we need to have a positive view. What will it look like? What new opportunities will there be? Having this positive vision will align, focus, and motivate us and our colleagues. We have a problem in our mind. You know, what's the issue? The iceberg is melting. Now, what does success look and feel like? Warning, I have no idea what an overall agile organization looks like. You know, I've performed workshops on this with dozens of companies and dozens of individuals, and all have produced very different results. Then what do we need to do? We need to communicate the vision. Frankly, most organizations under-communicate their vision. It is either kept at a top level and deliberately not shared, or else a half-hearted sharing is performed occasionally through corporate communication channels with limited audience. I have seen it said that simplicity and repetition helps understanding and retention. We must frequently and clearly communicate that vision. Now, how do we do this? Corporate spam is not enough. You know, the email from HQ often gets straight in the trash basket. Kotter's latest advice is what we've discussed in the Scrum Master section about mustering a volunteer army. Face-to-face communication can be a fantastic way of getting this vision across. Remove barriers. This leads us on to the next step in John Kotters' approach. Remove barriers. Now, removing barriers can be as simple as removing inefficient or inappropriate processes, or as difficult as deleting hierarchies and changing people's actual job roles. You know, what are your common barriers? You know, in agile transformations, I have seen things such as traditional management, how projects are funded and accounted for, the concept of project over product in general, the outsourcing of QA or developments to parties far removed geographically, i.e. offshore, or emotionally, outsourced. There are thousands. Now, one big impediment or block can be people themselves. I have seen these blocking elements referred to under many names, most unspeakable in a training video. Kotter, in his work, calls them no-nos. Now, Kotter does make a distinction between what he calls skeptics and no-nos. Skeptics are not closed-minded. They can be quite useful to help keep more naive ideas in check. They're just not idealistic and need convincing. So some of those previously mentioned wildcats, those internal long-term people, they could be looked upon perhaps as those skeptics. A no-no is someone who cannot be convinced. They are really someone resisting change and reducing the urgency behind the change. They may do this actively, out in the open, But many do it subtly, behind the scenes, whilst paying lip service to the transformation. They will often try and sideline the change program by wrapping it with bureaucracy, extra meetings and committees. Oh, and requirements for more data and more meetings and more committees. They don't want or need that data, but the process for creating and processing can be a powerful delaying tactic. And thus, we will need to have tactics to handle those no-nos. I have seen approaches including firing them, which is a little extreme for me, but I am an Englishman, to exposing them organisationally, to either the actual sense of urgency, putting the middle managers on with the salesman on the front line, or positions to feel appropriate feedback so they gain better understanding and expose their negativity to see if it can be minimised. Or, I've seen this one done, put into exile on some remote project. I once saw one guy get sent to an office on the other side of the world. Now, I felt sorry for the members of that office. You know, it strikes me there is no easy way of dealing with these political issues. But a strategy, however awkward or unpleasant, must be put into place. Give people a chance though. I have met many outwardly appearing no-nos who are in reality were just skeptics, struggling with the new mindset and approaches. When they get it, they often really get it. Some of the worst people I've had to deal with on day one have become some of the strongest advocates further into the experience. That's something that I still struggle with even after over a decade doing this. Short-term wins. The next step is to create short-term wins. We need to demonstrate to the organisation success, and we need to repeat this again and again. A pilot project is just not enough. We must continue to prove and prove and prove again. Luckily, this principle is at the very heart of the Agile movement. From the Agile Manifesto itself, our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through early and continuous delivery of valuable software. Now, this means I have seen Agile transformations not affected by the famous Kotter Change curve. Now, the Kotter Change curve is a 5-stage change model that describes the effects each step has on the emotions, thinking, and performance of the people undergoing the change. From this diagram here, you can see we start off with late status quo, the stage before the change occurs. There is some level of performance, people are in a stable state. Note, this may not actually be a happy state, but people are tolerating it and understanding their roles and responsibilities. Then comes the foreign element. In the area we're discussing here, this could be the introduction of a new idea or methodology by a small, powerful group to the wider community. This new element may be seen as a threat to the status quo, which usually equates to current job roles and management structures in our world, and thus resistance is generated. Valid, invalid, a variety of blocking tactics are generated to resist change. Then we come to stage 3. Stage 3 of the Kotter Change model is chaos. Historical ways of working no longer produce results. Old relationships may no longer be viable, and people feel vulnerable and exposed. Often everyone jumps in the lifeboats and try and secure their own experience, causing further damage to the end-to-end results. Productivity falls. And then we come to stage 4, integration. This is where fundamentally the group comes back together, often around a transforming idea, and performance starts rising again. And we hit stage 5, the new status quo. The change is now integrated into the workplace and a new, higher performance is generated. Now this pattern comes from, I think, Virginia Satir's work with families under strife and has been since applied to any group faced with and undergoing change. But, and you knew a but was coming, there is one thing I have noticed with agile transformations that make them a bit different. And I feel I should point this out. Performance in software development has historically been a real issue. How do you measure productivity in a knowledge-based economy? So many traditional management structures have put in place work models that frankly would not be out of place in the 19th century, let alone the 20th. With high levels of supervision and limited autonomy, these practices have often limited, and in fact slowed our teams down rather than sped them up. This means when we start loosening those methods, we actually start gaining productivity increases. Not great ones, but they're better than before. Marvellous! Well, not quite. You see, the Satir model shows us this chasm to cross, and whilst the drop in productivity can cause many change programs to be abandoned and then stranded at a lower level of performance than before, with our approach we can gain some increase and then they give up. They still suffer the emotional issues of change, but not the performance ones. Thus, a little bit of improvement is seen as good enough and they stop. This half-assed agility can be a great first baby step, but may come back to bite us. Anchor changes in corporate culture. So, what are the job titles of the Scrum Masters in your organisation? Is it Scrum Master? Is that on their contract? Congratulations, you have anchored that change into the corporate culture. Too many organisations are failing to achieve agility because they try to wear agile like it is a hat or a fashion rather than a serious, deep organisational change. The amount of people I meet playing the role of the Scrum Master is scary because they play the role, but underneath the surface, they are still the team lead or development manager or project manager for the delivery. And when push comes to shove, as Craig Larman, that previously mentioned inventor of large-scale Scrum, says, culture follows structure. People want proof. They will buy into this if we provide proof. Now, we've mentioned proof in prior section with short-term wins, but we need proof not just in results, but in the processes themselves. We need to show they are not short-term fads, but serious and long-term. Scrum Master is a career and not just for Christmas. And then is when I'd like to quote Pete Drucker, who has been described by some as the founder of modern management, who infamously said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. We need to turn the supertanker of culture, and to do that we need to embed the change deep and demonstrate and emphasize the empirical behaviors we need to succeed. There is a common error here that you may have been aware of. Declare victory too soon. Even leaders of the free world make this mistake.